Many thanks for joining us for this session. As you can see, this one is called, it's a BIG, a big world after all. This is the second of two lightning talks, which gives you an opportunity to hear from leading practitioners in units around the world about the work that they are doing. And in terms of the format, it really is a lightning talk session, okay? So this is not going to be long presentations. This is designed to be as interactive and really make all of you work as hard as possible. So the danger with some of these really big conferences is you listen to lots of really exciting presentations, you don't actually get to ask those really burning questions or the practical, detailed questions that you actually want to ask of practitioners. So this session has been designed to try and counter that. So I'm going to say just a few opening remarks and introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to get out the way and let our speakers give you the content. So each of our speakers, and I'll introduce them in just a moment, are going to speak for about 5 minutes. So they're only going to have time to give you a pretty high-level overview of broadly what they're focused on and one particular case study that they're interested in working on, and talk about what particularly sort of surprising challenge or barrier have they faced and how did they overcome that. Okay? So we're going to have it from each of our speakers. We're going to have 5-minute talks from each of them. And then there's going to be opportunity to deep dive into 2 group sessions. So I actually explain who exactly is going to be where when we get to that session. But each of our 4 speakers will be stationed around the room. So we're going to have 2 in the rooms over here. We're going to have Kate and Kazuyuki in this corner. We're going to have Ling at the back and Simon in this corner. And you're going to choose which speaker, having heard those 5-minute introductions, do you want to ask some further and more detailed questions. And as I said, this is all Chatham House rules. This is off the record, so these aren't sort of questions where you're going to hopefully just get the party line, or if they do give you the party line, keep pushing them. You're going to get 10 minutes in those small groups to really ask your speaker what sort of sits behind this, what are those practical challenges, and delve into a bit more detail. After you've had that first round of 10 minutes, we're going to come round, ring a bell or the digital bell equivalent, and you're going to have an opportunity to switch to a second speaker. Okay? So we'll move around. That should just take a couple of minutes, move to a different part of the room, and you'll go through the same process with a second speaker. And then hopefully, if that's all going to plan, we'll bring our speakers back up onto the stage. So if you haven't had an opportunity to speak, obviously, to 2 of the speakers, we can ask some final questions from them at the end in a panel format. Does that make sense broadly as a format? I can see some nodding. So I will take that as a confirmation. Given the tight time scale, I'm going to hand over to our speakers. It gives me great pleasure to have our 4 speakers here today. So in order, you're going to hear from Simon Gordon, who heads up the Australian government's behavioural economics team of Australia, the Beta Group based in Canberra. We will then hear from Dr. Ling, who is a group director at the Health Promotion Board in Singapore. We will then hear from Kazuyuki from the Japanese MITI unit, who heads that up. And then we will hear from Kate Phillips from the Victorian unit, who's going to talk us through one of the recent case studies she's been running about some of our own biases as policymakers, which I'm looking forward to. So that's the format for the session. You're going to hear from the 5 great speakers, and then you're going to hear from 2 of them in more detail, and then we'll all get back together at the end. So without further ado, I will hand over to Simon.
Is it the green? Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
All right, am I mic'd up? Am I?
Yes.
Cool. All right, I've only got 5 minutes, so I'm going to be pretty quick here. First, just a little bit about beta. Just a hands up if you've ever heard of beta. I won't take too much offence. Okay, maybe about a third, so it's probably worth running through a little bit. We were set up in about 2016, modelled off BIT and their success being set up a few years earlier. And we're in the Prime Minister's Department in Canberra. We came in as part of a large innovation agenda. We've got around 30 staff, which feels inadequate when you're doing the amount of work we do, but the more I talk to other teams, the more I realise that's quite a luxurious position that we're in. I've said there we're obsessed with applying BI to public policy. You've got to be a bit mad and obsessive about BI because there's so many people in government that just aren't interested, and you've got to really get them motivated and excited. So we're the people that get really obsessed about BI. We've worked in just about every corner of Commonwealth government. We only work on our Commonwealth government public policy, but we've worked in every portfolio of government, and you can see on this map here some of the different areas that we've worked in. And I'm happy to talk about any of these. We've produced an impact report which has a little snapshot of all of our projects. I've brought a whole bag of these over. One of my metrics of success will be that I don't have to take any of those back in luggage. So if you come and join me later, I'm happy to hand those across. We also have a mission to build BI expertise in Australia, and I'll talk about that just very briefly in a minute. And we hosted BX last year, so I know how the BIT team people are feeling today. It's tough work and they're doing a fantastic job. Just before I get to that, Rory asked us to talk about one project we're working on and to focus in on the challenges of that. I've been a bit cheeky. There were a few runners up in my thinking about like what I would focus on here today. So I might just run through some of those. The first project in terms of impact, we did a project with the Fair Work Ombudsman in Australia trying to get compliance with minimum wages. And the reason that that project really excited me in the last year is that it was a win-win-win for government, business and workers. So we improved the audit process for 2,000 businesses to get them to comply with minimum wage increases. It resulted in a $900 benefit for workers. The audit took 8 days less for business, and government also found it a smoother process. So that was a very impactful project. Another one that was impactful was our antimicrobial resistance project, which was modelled on the UK, and David Halpern briefly mentioned it yesterday. What's really exciting about that is that not only did that project reduce antibiotic prescriptions by 12% when we introduced it, but the exciting thing we've done this year is to see whether that had a persistent effect. And 12 months on, those same doctors are still about 9% lower than average with no further follow-up letter. So that's having a persistent impact, and that's one of the things that we wonder about in our field. Third thing that was exciting is we ran a big event called Former Palooza, and this was 200 people, civil servants. We got them to pretend they were members of the public and to in one day improve government forms. And I'd highly recommend that for teams who are setting up as a way of demonstrating practical impact. Politicians love it more than randomised control trials, I can tell you that. The last thing is that we've launched an e-learning module, and that's growing by about 75 people a week. So I could have spoken about any of those 4 things, but the project that I've chosen is based on building university student resilience. We're doing a bunch of work sort of in conjunction with the BIT team. We're sort of split into 2 different projects, but the aim is the same, and that is to get people who are vulnerable in universities and at risk of dropping out, typically from low socioeconomic backgrounds, to stay in university. What's really exciting about this project is that we've kind of let the team off the leash a little bit. We said, you know, we're getting a bit over just sending reminders and standard stuff. Really have a good think about what we want to do here. And our social psychologists in particular, who are in charge of the project, got really excited about this idea of a psychological immune system. So what they're saying is that there's a whole bunch of students who don't have that psychological immunity, they don't have much resilience, and so when you get the inevitable setbacks in university, you tend to drop out, whereas many of us sort of go over those humps and continue on. It draws on 2 parts of psychology, social identity theory and self-affirmation theory. I won't go into details of those, but what we've done with those 2 things is to, that's a little bit more, is to develop an app. And the app is a Zen garden. So this is why I'm saying it's quite out there. And just hearing Dan Ariely say how his turtle was a complete failure gave me heart palpitations because I'm already nervous about this project. And what we've done is we've built a Zen garden, and rocks represent important groups. It's a gamified app. And it's got a whole bunch of other features as well. Some of them are much more practical about connecting people to university generally, giving them some tips and tricks around how to do well in university. But the idea of it is that you play the game to develop groups and to maintain social groups. We are quite a long way along in the development of it. I wanted to actually show a live sort of rendering of the app, and the team freaked out because we're still getting some of the little bits and pieces out of it. It's been tested with about 300 students so far, and we're going to test it with another 300 students in the coming months to keep developing the app. The gamified nature of it is really interesting, and the student response so far has been very positive. But you know, just a straw poll, hands up if you reckon this is going to actually work or not. That's the positivity I'm after. Yeah. Because that's a bit like where I'm at as well. And that's the challenge here. The challenge, firstly, is we're trying to do something different. And I'm going to focus on this last hurdle, which it looks like someone has corrected, because I did make that a half a hurdle to fit in with my 2.5 hurdle thing. They probably thought I'd made a mistake and the picture was wrong. But the issue on the last one there is having the courage to do something risky and different. So if I'm honest, the odds that we can actually get people to use this app in a university setting is probably the biggest challenge. How do you get through app fatigue? How do you get them to actually use it? If we can get people to use it, we're quietly confident that it could make a difference for some students. But we will need to get large sample numbers to do a randomised control trial. We're rolling it out in 2 universities, a regional and an outer suburb university in Australia. And we need thousands of people to do it, so that's going to be a really tough gig. The BIT team have been successful in their sort of parallel project and getting numbers up, so we've got some confidence from that. So that's the project we're working on. It's going to roll out next year. I think it's going to be potentially our greatest win or something you'll never hear of again. And if there's a session at BX next year called Failing in the Field, we might be talking about this again. But it is really exciting, and I think that to me is kind of at the heart of where I can see the field going from this conference. Everyone's pushing onto that next level stuff, and some of it is a bit edgier, but that's where we need to go. I think that's about it from me, Rory. Would that be about 5?
Perfect, thank you.
Yep.
At Health Promotion Board Singapore, we constantly strive to change behaviors, inculcate healthy behaviors in our citizens, be it healthy eating, exercise regularly, do not smoke. But it's an uphill struggle for many of us because the opposite of this, the unhealthy behaviors, are very much a part of our citizens' habits, right? Someone once told me, in habit, if you take away H, you still have a bit left. And if you take away A, you still have bit left. So it's actually very difficult to get rid of habit. But to do this, we actually decided to gain in-depth understanding of our population. We started on an ambitious project to do so. Basically, what we wanted to do is to gather data on behavior and lifestyle activities as they go about their daily life. And that is about real-time data in real-world setting. So it is a very ambitious project. So what did we do? We issued a wearable to a group of young people, and together with a mobile application, obtained data over a 2-year period. Right. There are 3 components to this project. Taking license from E equal to MC squared, for us, data equals to MC cubed. The first MC here is about meaningful collection of data of the behavior. And the behavior we are looking at is their steps count, their heart rate, their sleep duration. We also collect data on their meals log, right? And along with it, responses to surveys that we insert along the way. We are mindful that this information, this data that we collect is not representative of the whole population. But what we want to do is to collect what is best available rather than what is best possible data. The second is about minimal commitment on the part of the participants. The requirements for the study for the participants are actually very, very low. We have set it very, very low. So for example, for a 2-year study, a participant to be continuously engaged in the study, we actually ask them to put on the wearable 8 hours a day for 7 days a month, and they do so for 24 months. Right? This is enough to give us meaningful insights as to what their pattern of behavior is like. Right? But doing this, even though it is minimal, it can be perceived as bothersome. So this is where we gamify the whole process. And this is where the third MC comes in, which is about motivated compliance. Right? For participants get reward, the more data they provide us. Actions that require conscious effort on their part will be higher rewards. And we are talking about very minor rewards here. the currency rate here that we talk about is 750 health points for 3, or equivalent to £3. So, for example, if they log in a meal a day, it's 40 health points. So the maximum they can get for that day is 100 points. Right? And we actually can tweak the system around this if the data is not coming in, we actually tweak the gamification to get more data to come in. So for example, in surveys that we want the participants to reply, we actually have a countdown timer, right? And we gamify the whole process because we know that in surveys, people do not respond. So what we do is we gamify this and the health points reduce over time as the counter ticks. Okay. So this forms the basis of our Health Insights Singapore study, or HISG. Now, the data we collect from here will move us towards the goal of precision public health to be empowered by machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is our next step of our work in this area. What is the one surprising thing in this project that Rory asked us to talk about? Basically, when we first started this journey, we were not very sure about whether the subject will come on board this project. We are looking at 2,000 subjects. And also the retention rates of these people in the project itself. Because cohort study, as most of us know it, 15 to 20% attrition rate is the norm. Now, we achieved the 2,000 numbers in 4 months into the study. 1 year on into the study, 99% of the participants are still very engaged in the project with us. And we see the results there. In fact, they are highly engaged and they gave us information more than what we require, right? But the health points, the rewards they gave is actually capped at a certain level, and yet they still give us the information. So I started this talk, sharing, to say that habit is difficult to get rid of, right? Maybe the answer to this lies perhaps in the use of information and technology, IT. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Kazuyuki Imazato from the METI, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry from the Japanese government. And today I'd like to talk about accelerated using the nudge of the industrial policy area. We set up a METI nudge unit on 21st May 2019, just 4 months ago, which is a cross-functional project team. Our team is relatively small. All of about 10 our members have another post in METI. Now, actually, I'm the director of Innovation Policy Division as well. So we just started a small 3 pilot project for the first year. And then after that, showing the result and the effectiveness of the using nudge in the Japanese industrial policy, we'd like to expand our unit and realize the concept of the experimental government by changing our traditional policy measures. In addition to running the nudge project, we also set up the training programs for our staffs and also the METI staffs, and communicate with both inside and outside of the METI. And then, I'm sorry, this is just a noisy slide. But here's our first project, improving the productivity of SMEs by utilizing the behavioral insights. In this SME project, we would like to approach 2 issues. One is accelerating the utilization of the digital tools, like in Singapore. And then the other is SME's business succession. In order to enhance productivities of the SMEs, introducing digital tools as HR systems or warehouse management system is very, very important. But many of the SME owners, it is very difficult to make the decision to change their traditional business way, even if the Japanese government provide a lot of subsidies to do it. Oh, sorry. And we would like to know which step in the decision process is essential and how we can effectively intervene the processes. This one. Recognizing the issues and the consideration of the solutions, and finally changing their businesses. And we set up a research project with SME support agencies. We will send various messages to SMEs with the information of the government policies, and such as subsidy, tax incentives, and other regulatory information related with the digitalization. And then finally, evaluate the effect. We will utilize the behavioral insights for considering the content and the timing of this message. And in addition, business succession is also a very important issue for the Japanese SMEs. In Japanese business owners, for the SMEs, over 60 years old, about 50%. And they are without any successors. Even though the METI and SME support agencies provide a matching program for the business owners with no successors, but their owners do not utilize this program well. Only limited number of them register to the program. So in order to change this behavior, we will explore what is the best message to promote their preparation for the business succession. By sending direct mails to 10,000 SMEs with utilizing the behavioral insight, such as loss schemes or a comparison with their peers or something like that. And then the most hurdle we are faces in this SME project, the first one is which step in the SME's decision making should we intervene with behavioral insight. Actually, we don't have enough data on the SME decision making. How they make their decisions, or when they make a decision or something like that. I think this is a big challenge for us. And the second one is that many of the SME owners is elderly person. And in generally speaking, elderly person tend to be low sensitive to external stimuli. So what type of behavioral insights should we use for elderly business owners? And the final one, and how should we collaborate with SME supporters agencies? Do we need to change SME support agencies' behavior or not? Or if so, how? And this is our plan of the SME project. And then we also, I also briefly introduced other two more projects. Just leave it. One is how to improve the promote energy efficiency. So we'd like to know how to accelerate replacement of low efficient equipment, and or how to change behavior of the household choice of their services. And the next one is a health project. And in this project, the Japanese government, send a health scoring report for the employers to notify its healthcare scores of its employees. And then we will improve the report information with behavioral insight in order to accelerate health and the productivity management in each companies. We'd like to improve the Japanese government industrial policy through utilizing the behavioral insight. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate, and as Rory said, I head up the Behavioural Insights Unit in the Victorian State Government. We're based at the Department of Premier and Cabinet, so like Simon's unit at the Commonwealth level, we're based as like a central unit, but set up to support departments and agencies across Victoria, and so kind of work across all policy portfolios and have done trials ranging from, how do we get more kids immunised or people to show up to their hospital appointments, which Dan Ariely touched on this morning, and had some great ideas for follow-ups of the trial that we're currently concluding. as well as portfolio areas like energy. But the thing that I wanted to talk to you today about was a piece of work that we did that's about how public servants themselves are biased. So there's been a big push in Victoria recently as to how can we bring more talent back inside the Victorian public service and rely less on external consultancies. Apologies to all the consultants in the audience. It's government policy. I didn't say that. But so there's been this push from government of how do we actually bring back and keep talent within the public service so that we're able to provide high quality advice to the government of the day. And the secretary, the head of our department, was really interested in understanding why is it that people actually go to consultants in the first place. And so as part of a broader program of work, we were asked to investigate some of the biases around why people might go out to market for services that they could equally have completed in-house. And one of our hypotheses was that the messenger effect was at play, that people were interpreting advice from consultants differently to how they would interpret the same advice from somebody internal. So we thought, consultants, they're going to be a more persuasive messenger to people. Maybe it's because of the independence element. Maybe it's because they think that the advice is more authoritative. But our hypothesis was that people are going to prefer consultant advice, all else being equal, than advice from internal departments. So what we did was a framed field experiment that involved randomising over 1,100 Victorian public servants into two different groups. And we created a false business case. So every year in Victoria, like in all governments, there's a budget process, and business units from across government put up policy proposals of here's an idea, this is a service we should fund or a policy we should pursue. And we wrote a fictitious proposal that was about a housing service, and it was about how we could reduce homelessness through deployment of rapid housing, which was like relocatable housing that could be shipped wherever across the state. And so entirely fictitious proposal. And we sent it out as part of a survey to public servants, asking them to consider that if they put themselves in the position of being a senior advisor to a secretary and decide whether or not, so that's a head of department in Australia, and decide whether or not the proposal should proceed. One group was told it was prepared by an external consultant. The other group was told it was prepared by an internal business unit. The policies themselves were identical. And respondents were asked, make a recommendation about whether or not the proposal should be funded. So this is the recommendation to fund or not to fund from the internal government author. And I should note we're really happy with this. We got almost exactly 50% of people who recommended funding. We had drafted the policy to be deliberately mediocre. We wanted to leave room for the messenger effect to take effect. We didn't want it to be either so good that everybody said, yeah, absolutely fund it. We also didn't want it to be so bad that everyone said, no way, this is a horrible idea. So there were some good elements of the proposal. It had some good evidence behind it and it was well cited, but there were also some poorer components of it. The numbers didn't, they added up in the funding table, but they weren't what you would expect for a program to scale over 4 years. They were a bit lumpy in terms of the staff allocation. So we deliberately made it mediocre, which we were very impressed was actually reflected in the results, with half the people saying go forward with it and half not when it was an internal government author. When it was external consultant author, however, far fewer people recommended that it be funded. So the blue bars that you see here are the numbers of people who recommended that the proposal be progressed, be funded, and that's 11 percentage points less likely if it was an external consultant author to be recommended to proceed. This was not what we expected, as you would gather from my initial introduction. And I should just say that there might be other factors at play. Perhaps there was a role of expectations. People think if they're going external, they expect the product to be better as compared with if it was done internally. It might be that people have preferences for specific consultancies, but an external consultant generally didn't have the same effect. And it was a framed field experiment, so this was not about a real policy proposal. So that comes with all the limitations of a framed field experiment. But Still, we got a very strong result. We're very confident in terms of, to the extent that you can be confident with a frame field experiment, that this is a real effect. The public servants in Victoria think, all else being equal, internal advice is better to external advice. So what do we do about it, and how is this challenging, and why is it challenging? So there were a number of kind of expected challenges with this running this trial, and I put this neat cartoon up here from Aalto University, which is basically just meant to illustrate that we all think other people are biased, but we're less good at recognising the biases within our own minds, and that goes for us as policymakers, consultants, people in general. We're all biased. The second challenge was getting people to complete the frame field experiment. We did a lot of work trying to minimise the cognitive reflection test battery, which we used as a control. So it was the minimal amount of work possible that people had to do these maths questions, put lots of effort into that. Didn't put nearly as much effort into making sure people got through the proposal itself. So actually, of everybody who read the proposal, every single person went on to complete all the cognitive reflection tests, but there were a number of people who dropped out while reading the proposal. That wasn't something, a challenge that we'd anticipated. We'd kind of calibrated for one challenge, the maths component, but not the reading component in terms of getting people to complete the survey. But finally, the challenge that I would put to all of you to think about is, what do we do when we get unexpected results? Perhaps there was some overconfidence bias within our team at play here, and that we were pretty confident that it was going to come out to say external consultants have this, badge, which means their advice is more accepted and respected, and therefore it's more likely to go through. But that wasn't the case, and we found a result very strongly in the opposite direction. If it had been the case, we would have recommended, there's an easy fix for that. We'll just blind all business cases so no one can see who prepared them. Should we implement that? We don't want to not accept ideas just because they come from elsewhere in the public service, a place other than in the public service. And yet, the results as they came out didn't align with the general policy preferences of the government of the day. So what do we do with this result? I would love to hear your thoughts.
Right, so thank you to that. All of our speakers managed to stay exactly on time. So any questions for the panel overall? Yes, please.
Question, if any of you have been able to embed sort of questions or requirements around evidence for funding programs or projects. I think the lab in DC has started some of that in DC, but that's the only one I've heard of thus far. Like in the budget request process, saying, as you're proposing that we fund this project, can you provide evidence?
I would love to do that. We don't currently do that. The only person I've heard of who does that is, I heard somebody from McMaster University speak about that, and I understand that the Canadian government, at least in some provinces, has done exactly that, where they require people to have undertaken certain searches of various databases of systematic reviews. McMaster has two amazing databases. One's called Health Systems Evidence, and one's called Social Systems Evidence, and you're required, depending on, if you bring something in the health portfolio, you have to have searched on health systems evidence and provide the decision maker with information about what the evidence currently says or whether or not there is evidence. But to my knowledge, that's the only jurisdiction I know of is doing that. But I would love to. It's a great idea.
Yeah, it's the holy grail for anyone interested in this working in public policy, is that would happen. I could probably talk a bit more offline. There was quite a big difference in opinion, I think, at our last election with both parties. I think I won't talk about that now, but I could talk offline. So there are individuals, interested in that in governments, and I think Canada's probably leading the way. Like anyone who went to the session when the Canadian crew were talking with David Halpin, I think you get that sense of there's quite a lot happening there, but you got to sort of unpack it and see actually how it's playing out in reality. There's still a lot of barriers even when you get that coming from the very top.
Fantastic. One more? Yes, please. Actually, I'll take two. We'll take those two questions, yeah.
My question is, have you managed to influence ministers, other government officials, and the drive is very much about savings? And they all they want is that saving to be guaranteed and there can't be failure. But as we've heard throughout this conference, actually we all need permission to fail, and the best ideas will be successful if we're allowed to be more creative and not hampered by it. So your experiences would be really helpful.
Thank you, and I'll take the second question from the gentleman next to you.
Thank you. My one was just around risk aversion and the suggestion that, the fact that the public sector, public servants are more risk averse, whether or not you think there's potential causes for this other than them perhaps working to a longer cycle or risk not truly being outsourced with outsourcing. Just your views on other causes or causes.
Nice. So two sort of linked questions on freedom to fail and risk aversion.
I won't go into this in great detail, and I'm happy to talk to others after, but we're doing a body of work. We call these things opportunity scans. And we go into each portfolio and we interview the secretary, the deputy secretaries, the next level down. So I think the top 20 people of the Treasury Department or the Communications Department, Education Department. We also do a survey of all staff at the same time. And what we're trying to elicit there is like what their priorities are, but also where their kind of BI capability is, but also their appetite for doing things like testing and applying BI. I think it's pretty, what I'm observing is that you find at the very highest levels of agencies, people who are completely on board. So the head of a department often gets this. They're like, this is fantastic stuff, you should really do it. And then as you go down, you get mixed views. From the bottom up, you get people who are very enthusiastic. So the graduates coming into the departments are typically, this is innovation, this is what they've come through university courses that do more of this. So somewhere in the middle, something's breaking down there. And I think anyone who's kind of tried to do cultural change in an organisation or tried to do social movement from outside in a not-for-profit finds that it's the middle management which are the hardest nuts to crack. I think they get squeezed at both ends, and I think they're also don't have a lot of incentives to take risks. So that's where I'd focus our efforts, I think, to get a cultural change.
Great, thanks. Any other comments on freedom to fail and
Yes, well, for us, I'm talking from a practitioner point and the civil servant, right, doing the projects. Basically, risk aversion is present, but happens in culture is very important, but what happens in us is that when we find that a project is not working, very quickly we will be honest, admit it, and say that it's not working, but this is what we plan to do next. Very often what we find is that we do, when our bosses would like to know is, so yes, this has failed, but what do you intend to do? Because the question at hand that you are trying to answer is still there, right? So if we can come up with a possible solution or a comeback to the failure that we have experienced, more often than not, the support will be given. Because the question at hand that we are trying to address is still present.
any final thoughts?
Just this, do you want to talk? Sorry.
Sorry. And actually, from the Japanese civil servant standpoint, the Japanese people tend to be very risk averse. So many people doesn't want to take a risk. So we needed to change such kind of the Japanese culture to more take a risk and then to change their businesses. So especially we would like to focusing on the SMEs. The reason why we focus on the SMEs is that the very typical risk-averse entity is the SMEs for Japan. So that's why we'd like to change such kind of a behavior, and then finally we'd like to change such kind of a Japanese culture, I think.
I have two quick thoughts on that. One is that we don't consider the risk of the status quo, and that's something that we've been trying to get people to consider. People somehow think that what we're currently doing is riskless, and that's obviously not true. And so one of the things we get people to do when they do their risk assessment matrices is we always make people consider the risks of the status quo. That's like an additional column in our templates, because otherwise people often behave as though those risks don't exist. In terms of the freedom to fail, I think it's a really interesting question. We've had some pretty strong exec support in Victoria to publish results that didn't work and make a big song and dance about it, because that's just as important. I'm on a mission to host a government fuck-up night where we can all come and talk about our failures. Haven't yet got that one over the line, but, you know, I'll keep you posted.
Yeah.
Sounds like a drink session for next year's BX. The government and ETA. I hope to see you all there.
I had one thing on the savings question, because we didn't really go into that, is that in those scans we did, like, we're not finding that that's actually the barrier. It's, for the work we do, the time it takes is probably a bigger barrier. Like, people want quick input. You know, can you do something in the next couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? So we find everyone's interested in behaviour, desktop advice, the long-term testing required for randomised control trials when you haven't got huge data sets you can draw on means that people feel like you're going to miss the policy cycle and you're going to miss, and there's a truth to that as well. So I think that's probably a bigger barrier than the concern around money and savings, and maybe even risk.
Great, thank you. So if I can draw it to a close, can I just get one last round of applause, both for our speakers and for yourselves?